So 2025 was the year of the Irish presidential election. Michael D. Higgins was leaving office after 14 years as the Irish president. It's worth noting that the Irish president is largely symbolic. Michael D. Higgins spent most of his time attending football matches and looking like a hobbit. And instead of an inconspicuous transition of presidents after an election, what we got was a complete sham. We ended up with two establishment hacks and 49% of the population saying that they don't feel represented by either candidate. Pretty much half the country.
Many voters were unhappy at the unusually small field of candidates in this election, leading to an extremely low turnout and an unprecedented number of spoiled ballots.
Semi-ironically, an abysmal voter turnout was masked by spoiled votes, which were 13%, 200,000 votes. And if it weren't for spoiled votes, this would have marked the worst turnout for an Irish presidential election. And why do Irish voters feel unrepresented is because we weren't allowed to be represented. There were a lot of candidates who wanted to run, like Conor McGregor.
Good morning, citizens of Ireland. I'm here today outside the office of the Taoiseach an Taoiseach, where we are over 200 days into the formation of current government. Our tourism has sharply declined, while danger on our streets has risen.
And we had other candidates like Gareth Sheridan or Maria Steen that were just blocked from running. So why did they block these candidates? I think it was because they were afraid. They're afraid because they know what happens when you allow the voice of the people to be heard. They saw what happened with Brexit, what happened with Trump, and all the right-wing figures that are getting elected across Europe. This is at a time when the Irish people are fed up with their government for many of the same reasons that got Trump elected. The Irish people are sick of the left-wing woke agenda and immigration. We've had protests and riots increasingly about immigration in Ireland. Despite polls and surveys constantly showing that this is what the Irish people want. 60% want more closed immigration policy. 3 in 4 think Ireland is taking too many refugees. But we're continually gaslighted by the mainstream politicians to say that there's no problem.
So the immigration rate isn't too high, but the way it's being handled is ineffective. Would that be the party position?
That's the issue, yeah.
Except the public clearly doesn't feel that way. But instead of listening, the majority of people are labelled as fascists.
Anyone who thinks that Clondalkin says no is not a far-right activist is not realistic. They are nothing more than fascists, and I will have nothing got to do with those. And I suggest that no. And I suggest that no.
Back to the meeting. Back to the meeting.
That's
without interruption. It's all the immigrant
That's it. That's it.
What a joke Irish politicians have become. They've become completely unmoored from the will of the people. When asked would you be more likely or less likely to vote for a candidate that voiced concerns about immigration, 38% said they'd be more likely, with only 80% saying they'd be less likely. But instead of giving us that candidate, they just blocked them because few people of Ireland. Another indication of how badly this was going to go for them was the 2024 Irish referendum. They wanted to change the constitution to redefine family and use gender-neutral language in the role of a woman in the home. All 3 of our major parties told us to vote yes in both referendums. Fianna Fáil, Sinn Féin, we're calling for yes on both counts. Yes to equality, yes to fairness. Our ostensibly right-wing representatives in Fine Gael said vote yes for care and yes for family, for a modern and inclusive Ireland. Despite all this support from the mainstream politicians, and despite the media backing it and predicting that it was going to be a yes victory, the Irish voters had other plans and we resoundingly rejected these constitutional changes. We said no on both counts. And one of the only political figures advocating for the no vote, which ultimately won, was Maria Steen.
The two referendums that the government proposed on care and the family have been resoundingly defeated. I'm wondering, what's your initial reaction?
Yeah, it's a great victory for common sense. And I think it's also clearly a rejection by the Irish people of the political elites, NGOs like the National Women's Council, who are funded by public monies and who really pushed the government to run this referendum. It's also a rejection of a campaign of misinformation by the government, who would not engage with the reasonable concerns of the no side. And it's also a rejection of a government that seems more concerned with social media plaudits than actually getting on with the business of governing the country.
The same Maria Steen who wasn't allowed run in the presidential election. And when looking at the spoiled votes, when asked who they would have voted for if they were on the ticket, 68% said Maria Steen. It's also important to look at the type of people who spoiled their ballots. They were overwhelmingly centrist or right-wing. They were also majority working class, because the left wing always pretends to speak for the common man, the working man, while at the same time marginalising them and ignoring their opinions. So the election comes and goes without any right-wing, centrist right representation. And what do our weak and insipid right-wing leaders have to say for themselves?
Taoiseach, there's obviously going to be people watching this who did spoil their ballots in a very deliberate way to send a protest message to the government. What is your message to those voters who are watching this now? And also, do you regret in hindsight that there were not more candidates on the ballot? Do you think if you could go back, it would have been better if there were a wider range of options on offer?
On the ballot. And I do think it is. I think it is regrettable that there were only 2 active candidates on the ballot. That's not how I saw the election going, genuinely.
I wish there was more candidates, says the clown that was actively blocking people from getting onto the ticket. Well, of course we have to block them. Otherwise, people might actually vote for them, and they might actually win. Why are you so afraid? If you have Simon Harris, a member of the ostensibly right-wing party, blocking independent candidates, you can imagine what the left-wing parties are doing. But that just sums it up. It's not about representative democracy. They don't want actual representation of the people in Ireland. They just want to keep themselves and their establishment hacks in power. The system is being manipulated, and it's clearly failing Ireland. But the Irish public is incensed by this lack of representation and their opinions being ignored. Henry Grattan, who fought for an independent Ireland, said it best. The almost unanimous voice of the people is with you, and in a free society, the voice of the people must prevail. People are angry, and they can only sideline us for so long. Already politicians like Simon Harris and Micheál Martin had to make some concessions begrudgingly on immigration. We will be heard and we are winning, so we just have to keep fighting.